Eli Chun had always believed that awkward moments came in small doses, but nothing prepared him for the shock of realizing he had accidentally walked in on his roommate, Adrian Reyes, crying at 3 in the morning. Adrian, the man who treated emotions like a distant rumor. Adrian, whose default expression hovered somewhere between annoyed and silently judging. Now he was sitting on the kitchen floor gripping a shattered mug like his heart had cracked with it. The second Eli spoke his name, Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't look up. He simply whispered a single sentence that hit harder than any scream. "I can't keep pretending I don't feel anything for you anymore." For a moment Eli genuinely thought he had fallen asleep on his laptop again, and this was one of those sleep paralysis nightmares where attractive men suddenly confessed without warning. But no, this was real. Very real. Too real, because Adrian finally lifted his head, eyes red, expression fierce in a way that made Eli's pulse misfire. And that was the moment everything broke open in Eli's life. It wasn't supposed to be like this. They were supposed to be just roommates. Just two guys sharing a cramped apartment in Brooklyn to avoid paying soul-crushing rent. Eli had come to New York for graduate school, chasing dreams that felt too big for his small-town upbringing in Oregon. Adrian was the opposite. A former high school football star turned quiet, intimidating EMT who rarely smiled, rarely talked, and definitely never cried. Until tonight. Eli stood frozen in the doorway, unsure if he was allowed to breathe. "Adrian, what are you talking about?" But Adrian didn't answer. He just looked at him, not with anger or frustration, but with something raw and devastating, like a man who had finally surrendered after years of resisting. And that look, more than the confession, more than the broken mug and sleepless hour, terrified Eli, because a part of him had been falling for Adrian for months. But he could never admit that. Not after the many times Adrian shut down his attempts at small talk, ignored him for days, or walked out of the room when things got too personal. Not after Adrian made it so painfully clear that he didn't want intimacy or closeness. Yet here they were, drowning in both. Eli's voice trembled. "Adrian, why now?" Adrian exhaled slowly, as if every breath cost him something. "Because you smiled at me yesterday and I realized I can't keep pretending it means nothing." Eli's mind spun. His heart spun. The whole world spun. And deep down, he knew everything was about to change. The confession didn't vanish when morning arrived. Eli had hoped it would dissolve into the haze like a strange nocturnal hallucination, but the tension clung to the apartment like humidity. Adrian didn't slam the door when he left for work. He didn't ignore Eli's existence. He didn't even pretend the night before had never happened. Instead, he paused by the kitchen counter where Eli sat over a bowl of cereal he wasn't actually eating. "We need to talk when I get back." It wasn't a request. It wasn't a threat. But it was enough to hollow Eli out for the rest of the day. "Talk about what?" He'd wanted to ask. "Talk about how you avoided me for months? Talk about how you suddenly dropped a confession like a grenade? Talk about how half of me wants to kiss you and the other half wants to run away?" But Adrian had already left, the door clicking shut like punctuation on a sentence Eli didn't know how to interpret. It didn't help that Eli's best friend, Miriam, called him minutes later with her usual chaotic energy. "Did you finally confess to your hot roommate?" she shouted before he could say hello. Eli nearly choked. "Miri, he confessed to me." There was a long silence. "I'm sorry. I think my brain just blue-screened." The cold, broody, 6-foot wall of muscle confessed to you. "Yes." "Are you sure you were awake?" "I wish I wasn't." He told her the story, and for once Miriam didn't interrupt. She didn't cackle or gasp or make unhelpful commentary. "Eli, this guy has been avoiding emotions since the day you met him," she finally said. If he cracked enough to say that out loud, it means something big. But that only made things worse, because it meant Eli had no idea what to do now. The memory of the first time Eli met Adrian drifted through his mind throughout the day. He had been moving into the apartment 2 semesters ago and nearly dropped a box labeled fragile on his foot. Adrian had caught it with one hand, barely blinking, and said nothing more than a gruff careful. Eli had introduced himself, offered a handshake, even cracked a dumb joke about becoming best roommates ever. Adrian had nodded, expression unreadable, and walked away. For weeks, The only sound Adrian made was the occasional deep sigh when he came home from his shifts. Eli learned to interpret them. One sigh meant he was tired. 2 sighs meant he was in a bad mood. 3 sighs meant he was so exhausted he couldn't remember his own name. But despite the cold front, Eli had caught fleeting moments of softness. The way Adrian draped a blanket over him when he fell asleep studying on the couch. The way he restocked Eli's favorite tea without mentioning it. The way his eyes warmed when Eli rambled about things he loved. Eli convinced himself those moments didn't mean anything. They were just Adrian being decent, being polite, being the kind of person who had a good heart but didn't want anyone to see it. Last night shattered that illusion. By late afternoon, Eli couldn't focus on anything. Not his online lectures, not his thesis research, not the grocery list he had been trying to write for over an hour. His brain kept circling back to Adrian's voice. I can't keep pretending I don't feel anything for you anymore. It had been steady, controlled. But there was an undercurrent of fear, like Adrian had been holding the words back for so long they had finally forced their way out. Why now? Why after all this time? Why confess when Eli had finally learned to ignore the ache he carried for him? The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting warm light through the apartment windows. Eli stood in the kitchen, hands pressed against the counter, trying to slow his breathing. Then the door opened. Adrian stepped in, still in his dark EMT uniform, hair slightly tousled from the day, shoulders heavy but posture unbearably calm. His gaze found Eli instantly. We should talk. Eli nodded because he couldn't speak. Not yet. They sat across from each other at the small dining table, a space too intimate for conversations like this. Adrian inhaled deeply. I'm not good with emotions. You know that. Yeah, Eli whispered. But last night wasn't a mistake. I meant what I said. Eli's heartbeat stuttered. Then why did you avoid me for so long? Why push me away? Adrian's jaw tightened. Because wanting you scared the hell out of me. The confession wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it shook Eli to the core. Adrian continued, voice low. I'm not used to feeling things that matter. It's easier to stay distant. Easier to focus on work. On routine. On anything that keeps people out. He looked down at his hands. But you kept slipping past my walls without even trying. Eli blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. So you just decided to confess at 3 a.m. while crying on the kitchen floor? Adrian's mouth twitched, almost into a smile. I didn't decide. It just happened. That was the problem. Everything with Adrian happened like a sudden storm. No warning, no build-up, just chaos. Eli swallowed hard. Adrian, I don't know what you expect from me. Adrian leaned in slightly, voice steady but trembling underneath. I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know. And if you don't feel the same I do. Eli hadn't meant to say it out loud. But there it was, hanging in the air between them like a spark waiting to ignite. Adrian froze. You do? Eli nodded, pulse hammering. But that doesn't erase everything. The distance, the coldness, the mixed signals. You kept me at arm's length for months. And now you want to talk about feelings? Adrian swallowed. I know. And I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I need a chance. A real one. If you'll let me. Eli wanted to be angry. He wanted to push Adrian the way he had been pushed. But looking at him tired, vulnerable, stripped of the emotional armor he always wore, Eli felt the fury dissolve into something weary and tender. He sighed softly. Then we go slow. And you don't shut me out again. Adrian nodded firmly. I want. Silence wrapped around them, but it wasn't cold anymore. For the first time, it felt like the beginning of something fragile and real. And terrifying. And maybe, just maybe, wonderful. Eli didn't sleep that night. Not because of anxiety this time, but because the apartment felt strangely alive, as if every object had absorbed the new truth between them. Even the hum of the old radiator sounded different, warmer somehow. Adrian had gone to bed after their conversation, but not before pausing at the hallway, glancing back at Eli with a look that was equal parts exhausted and hopeful. Good night, Eli. It was the softest he had ever said his name. Eli replayed that moment again and again as he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. There was something unreal about finally knowing Adrian felt the same way, or at least something close to same. But beneath the rush of relief was an undercurrent of fear that wouldn't leave him. Wanting Adrian wasn't the problem. Handling Adrian, the walls, the silences, the emotional landmines, that was the frightening part. By morning, Eli had made exactly zero progress understanding his own heart. He walked out to the living room to find Adrian already awake, sitting on the couch in sweatpants and a plain t-shirt, scrolling through something on his phone. There was a mug of coffee on the table. 2 mugs. One was clearly for him. That simple gesture hit Eli harder than it should have. Adrian looked up. Morning. It was too gentle. Eli wasn't equipped for gentle Adrian. Morning, he echoed. Adrian rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I made coffee. You always get migraines when you skip caffeine. Eli blinked. You noticed that? Adrian shrugged without meeting his eyes. I noticed things. That shouldn't have made Eli's chest tighten. But it did. He picked up the mug and sat across from him. Thanks. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't sharp or uncomfortable. It was more like 2 people trying to figure out how to exist in a space that had suddenly changed shape. Finally, Eli cleared his throat. About last night. Adrian stiffened slightly, though he tried to hide it. Yeah. Eli searched for the right words. I'm not going to pretend like this isn't confusing. I care about you a lot, but I need something stable, Adrian. I need communication. I need honesty. Adrian nodded slowly. I know. Do you? Eli asked quietly. Because you shut down whenever something gets too close. Adrian's jaw tensed. Not defensively, but in guilt. I'm trying to be different. Eli held his gaze. Then talk to me. About anything. About what's going on in your head. A long breath. I can try. It was more than Eli expected. More than he realized he needed. Later that afternoon, they ended up walking to a small grocery store 3 blocks away. It wasn't a big deal, at least not on the surface. But Adrian fell into step beside him instead of rushing ahead or lagging behind. He hovered close enough that Eli could feel his warmth, and every time a car passed, Adrian subtly shifted so he was on the outside of the sidewalk. Protective. Quietly protective. It was unfair how much that affected Eli. Inside the store, Eli reached for a box of granola bars, but Adrian grabbed the higher one before Eli even stretched. I've seen you climb the counters for these before, Adrian said, a faint amusement flickering in his voice. Eli blinked up at him. Oh my God. You've been watching me embarrass myself for months. Adrian actually smiled, small, crooked, but undeniably real. Yeah. Eli felt his heart do something undignified. As they moved down the aisles, they fell into a rhythm that felt strangely natural. Eli rambled about a documentary he watched last week. Adrian listened, really listened, asking questions that showed he paid attention. It was something Eli had always admired but never expected directed toward him. Then at the checkout, the cashier, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, glanced between them. You two make a cute couple. Eli choked on nothing. Adrian froze like he'd been hit with a tranquilizer dart. We're not, Eli started. But Adrian spoke first. We're figuring things out. Eli whipped his head toward him, stunned. Adrian's ears were faintly red, but his voice was even. The cashier smiled, bagging their groceries. Well, good luck to you both. Out on the sidewalk, Eli couldn't resist. You told her we're figuring things out? Adrian kept walking, but his voice was low. We are, aren't we? Eli felt heat rise to his cheeks. Yes. I just didn't expect you to say it like that. Adrian gave a small shrug. I wasn't ashamed. That sentence alone knocked every coherent thought from Eli's mind. Adrian wasn't someone who threw around vulnerability. He guarded himself more fiercely than anyone Eli had ever met. So hearing him say that he wasn't ashamed meant more than any romantic confession could. When they got back to the apartment, Adrian helped unload the groceries, placing everything neatly in the pantry. Eli watched him for a moment, noticing the care he took lining up items, the quiet focus, the calm presence he rarely let others see. Eli leaned against the counter. Can I ask you something? Adrian looked up. Yeah. Why me? Why did you? Fall for me? Adrian's expression didn't change at first. He put down the box he was holding, wiped his hands on a kitchen towel, and leaned back against the opposite counter, facing Eli directly. Because you're warm, he said simply. Eli blinked. What? You're warm? Adrian repeated, voice steady but soft. People gravitate toward you. You care about things deeply. You care about people deeply. And he hesitated, struggling for words. I don't do that easily. Another pause. But with you, it didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like something I had to earn or pretend for. I just felt safe. Even when I didn't want to. The honesty in his tone struck Eli like a wave. Adrian wasn't someone who spoke in metaphors or poetic lines. Everything he said came from a place of painful sincerity. And right now, that sincerity was undoing Eli entirely. Eli stepped closer, not too close, but close enough Adrian noticed. You never had to pretend for me. Adrian's gaze dropped briefly, then lifted again. I know that now. For the first time since the confession, something unspoken and warm bloomed between them, not passion, not desperation, but possibility. A fragile, precious possibility. That night, Adrian knocked lightly on Eli's bedroom door. Hey, can I come in? Eli sat up from his bed, surprised. Yeah, sure. Adrian stepped inside, hesitating by the doorway like he wasn't sure how far he was allowed to go. I didn't want to interrupt if you were studying. I'm not, Eli said gently. I'm just procrastinating like a professional. Adrian huffed a small breath that was almost a laugh. They stood there for a moment, the silence stretching but not uncomfortably. Finally, Adrian spoke. Earlier, when you said you want communication, he shifted slightly. I can try telling you things, even if they're messy, even if I'm slow at it. Eli's chest softened. Okay, then tell me something now. Something true. Adrian hesitated a long, heavy pause, then walked a few steps closer, stopping at the edge of the bed. Something true, he echoed quietly. Something like, I think about you more than I think about anything else. Eli felt the air leave his lungs. Adrian continued, voice low. And when I avoided you, it wasn't because I didn't want you close. It was because I wanted you too much. And I didn't trust myself not to mess it up. Eli whispered, Adrian. I'm not saying this to rush anything, Adrian said quickly. I just want you to know the truth. You deserve that. Eli swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the sincerity in Adrian's voice. Thank you. Really? Adrian nodded, backing up a step. Good night, Eli. Before he reached the door, Eli called softly. Adrian? He turned. You can sit with me for a bit if you want. Just sit. You don't have to talk. Adrian froze, startled, hopeful, uncertain. Then he stepped back inside and closed the door gently behind him. He sat beside Eli on the bed, shoulders tense at first, posture overly stiff. But as minutes passed, he relaxed gradually, his breathing evening out, his presence grounding. They didn't talk. They didn't touch. They just existed together in the same quiet space. And somehow, it felt more intimate than anything Eli had ever experienced. Over the next few days, their dynamic shifted subtly at first, then steadily. Adrian lingered more. He didn't retreat to his room the moment he got home. Instead, he stayed in the living room while Eli worked, sometimes reading, sometimes dozing lightly on the couch while Eli typed on his laptop. Once, Eli woke him accidentally by dropping a pen. Adrian blinked up at him, hair messy, voice gravelly. You okay? Eli nodded, flustered. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. Adrian's eyelids were heavy, but he murmured, It's fine. I like being here. And God, Eli had no defense against sentences like that. They cooked dinner together more often. Adrian chopped vegetables with precise, practiced motions while Eli told him about a disastrous class presentation he once gave in high school. Adrian actually laughed a low, warm sound that made Eli look up in surprise. What? Adrian asked. Eli shook his head, smiling. I've just never heard you laugh like that. Adrian looked faintly embarrassed. Guess I don't do it much. Well, maybe you should, Eli said gently. It's nice. Adrian stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. You make it easier. One evening, a late winter storm swept across the city, drumming against the windows and draping Brooklyn in a blurry, wet haze. The streets were nearly empty, and the apartment felt cozier than usual, lit only by a warm lamp and the glow from Eli's laptop. Adrian sat on the other end of the couch, working quietly on something on his phone. Eli tried to focus on his paper, but his thoughts kept drifting to the man sharing the couch with him. Over the last week, Adrian had opened up more than Eli thought possible. Small pieces, small truths, but they mattered. They were real. Eli shut his laptop gently. Adrian looked up. Yeah. Can I ask you something? You can ask me anything, Adrian said immediately, surprising them both. Eli hesitated, then met his eyes. When you confessed, were you afraid? Adrian didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted briefly toward the window, as if thinking back to that night. Finally, he nodded once. Terrified. Why? Because wanting someone as good as you felt like asking for heartbreak, Adrian said quietly. And because I didn't think I'd survive it if you didn't want me back. Eli's breath hitched. He hadn't expected that level of vulnerability, not so soon, not from Adrian. But it was honest, and it revealed just how much Adrian had been carrying alone. Eli moved slightly closer, not by much, but enough for Adrian to notice. I'm not going to hurt you. Adrian's voice was low. I know. That's why it's so scary. The room seemed to exhale around them. Eli didn't touch him, didn't push for more. Instead, he simply leaned his shoulder lightly against Adrian's, a simple, grounding contact. Adrian stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, letting out a silent breath. They stayed like that for a long time, shoulders touching, storm raging outside, something quiet and fragile growing in the warmth between them. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't anything dramatic. It was something better. It was trust. And for Adrian, trust was the strongest form of intimacy he could offer. The storm passed overnight, leaving the city washed clean by morning. Puddles reflected the pale winter sun, and the air smelled sharper, almost new. Eli woke earlier than usual, not because of noise but because something felt different, as if the fragile balance he and Adrian had been building was reaching a quiet turning point. When he walked into the kitchen, he found Adrian standing by the stove, flipping pancakes with concentration usually reserved for solving complex problems. His hair was still damp from a shower, curling slightly at the ends. Sunlight softened the hard lines of his face. Eli leaned against the doorframe, watching him with a mix of affection and bewilderment. You're making breakfast? Adrian glanced over his shoulder. Thought you might like it. Eli raised an eyebrow. You hate cooking in the morning. I don't hate it, Adrian corrected. I'm bad at it. The pancakes sizzled in a way that fully supported his claim. Eli laughed despite himself. Okay, yeah, you're definitely bad at it. Adrian shrugged, but a tiny smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I'm trying. That was the thing about Adrian. His efforts were never grand or loud. They came in the form of small, imperfect gestures that mattered because they were difficult for him. Eli quietly walked up behind him, gently placing a hand on Adrian's forearm to stop him from burning another pancake. Here, let me help. Adrian froze for a heartbeat before easing into the contact. Thanks. They cooked together, shoulder to shoulder, moving in an unspoken rhythm that had developed naturally over the past few weeks. It felt domestic in a way that made Eli's chest ache. When they finally sat at the table with two uneven stacks of pancakes, Adrian cleared his throat. Eli, can I ask you something? Eli's stomach fluttered. That tone always meant Adrian had been thinking too much. Sure. Adrian stared down at his plate, fingers tapping once against the table before he spoke. Where do you see this going? Eli stilled. This? Us, Adrian clarified softly. I know we're taking it slow. I know I'm not. Easy. But I need to know if you're staying because you want to, not because you feel obligated after what I told you. Eli's heart broke a little at how sincere the fear sounded. He reached across the table, resting his hand over Adrian's. I'm here because I want to be, because I care about you, and because you're worth staying for. Adrian's eyes lifted, and for once, The vulnerability wasn't hidden behind walls. Even if I mess up, we'll figure it out, Eli said, squeezing his hand. Together, Adrian stared at him, expression softening in a way Eli rarely saw. You're kind of unbelievable. Eli grinned. I get that a lot. Adrian snorted an actual snort and Eli laughed, the sound filling the small kitchen like sunlight. Later that day, they went for a walk through Prospect Park. The trees were bare and the air cool, but the paths were alive with people. Joggers, dog walkers, a group of kids throwing snow at each other. Adrian shoved his hands into his pockets, walking just close enough that their arms brushed occasionally. Eli watched him from the corner of his eye. You look less stressed today. Adrian exhaled slowly. I feel less stressed. Then, after a pause, with you I feel steady. Like I don't have to keep bracing all the time. Eli felt warmth bloom deep in his chest. That's a good thing, right? Adrian nodded. A really good thing. They stopped by the lake, where thin sheets of ice shimmered at the edges. Ducks paddled through the cold water, leaving ripples behind them. Eli shoved his hands deeper into his coat pockets. Can I tell you something too? Eli asked. Always, Adrian said quietly. Eli inhaled. I was scared of this at first of you. Not because you're cold, but because you matter. And when someone matters, losing them hurts. Adrian turned to him. But Eli shook his head. I'm not going anywhere. I just needed you to know where my fear came from. Adrian looked at him for a long time, eyes soft in a way that made Eli's breath catch. Thank you for telling me. The wind picked up, tugging at Eli's scarf. Adrian stepped closer, instinctively shielding him from the cold. It was such an Adrian thing to do, quiet protection disguised as practicality, that Eli smiled before he even realized it. You're staring, Adrian murmured. Eli rolled his eyes. Because you're being cute. I'm allowed to stare if you're cute. Adrian's ears turned bright red. I'm not, you are, Eli insisted. Adrian looked away, but a small smile, shy and genuine, tugged at his mouth. As they walked home, something unspoken but comforting settled between them. Not tension, not uncertainty, something steady, warm, and real. When they reached the apartment, Adrian stopped just inside the doorway. Eli? Yeah. Adrian hesitated, then stepped closer, close enough that Eli could feel the faint warmth of his breath. Can I try something? His voice was barely above a whisper. Eli's heart stumbled, but his voice remained soft. You can try anything. Adrian's hand rose slowly, pausing in the air as if giving Eli time to pull away. When Eli didn't, Adrian gently cupped the side of his face, thumb brushing lightly against his cheek. Eli leaned into the touch without thinking. Adrian's gaze flicked to his lips once, briefly, before he whispered, Tell me if I should stop. You don't have to stop, Eli breathed. And with exquisite gentleness, Adrian kissed him. It wasn't urgent or hungry. It wasn't the kind of kiss that demanded. It was soft, careful, almost reverent, like Adrian was learning what tenderness felt like in real time. Eli's fingers curled lightly into Adrian's shirt, pulling him closer. Adrian deepened the kiss only slightly, the kind of shift that said he was giving everything he could without crossing a line. When they finally parted, Adrian rested his forehead against Eli's. I've wanted to do that for a long time. Eli smiled, breathless and warm. Me too. Adrian exhaled shakily, like relief finally settling into his bones. So, this is real, right? Eli brushed a strand of hair from Adrian's forehead. Yeah, this is real. Adrian nodded once, a subtle, quiet gesture, but the brightness in his eyes said everything he didn't know how to say. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in the soft light of their tiny apartment, listening to the distant sounds of New York outside their window. Two people who had spent months stumbling around each other, finally finding the courage to meet in the same place. Not perfect, not fixed, not magically healed, just choosing each other. And for them, that was enough. It was more than enough. The beginning of something steady, fragile, human. The beginning of something beautiful. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.